Nearby at the Roy Rogers Museum, followers of the King of the Cowboys may experience what it was like to be a tiny cowboy in the Wild West. For many years, it served as a haven for movie buffs and nostalgic souls alike, housing an assortment of relics from the golden age of Western cinema and other cherished items. But now those options are permanently unavailable, and we're all left to question what happened to bring us to this position. Where has this famous landmark gone? In order to understand why the Roy Rogers Museum shut down, let's take a trip down memory lane. Before we get into the reasons behind the Roy Rogers Museum's closure, let's take a look at its origins and the man responsible for making it famous, Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers' parents, Mattie and Andrew "Andy" Sly, were born Leonard Franklin Sly in Cincinnati, Ohio on November 5, 1911. Roy would make the joke, "I was born at second base, destined for greatness from the start," while describing his childhood in a tenement on 2nd Street, which is now Riverfront Stadium. With 3 sisters, Kathleen, Mary, and Cleta, he had company throughout his childhood. The city and his work weren't exactly Andy Sly's cup of tea. He despised it to the point that he and his brother Will opted to forego it all and construct a houseboat measuring 12 by 50 feet out of reclaimed wood. Who among us hasn't fantasized about escaping the rat race and floating down a river instead? The Sly family embarked on their houseboat journey up the Ohio River toward Portsmouth, Ohio, in July of 1912. Life had other ideas, though, and they never got around to constructing the house on the property they had purchased. Their houseboat was brought onto dry land after the big flood of 1913, and the family continued to live in it. For the purpose of laying down more permanent lines, the Slys purchased a farm at Duck Run, close to Lucasville, Ohio, around 12 miles north of Portsmouth in 1919. They constructed a 6-room dwelling, but Andy quickly came to the realization that farming would not lead to their financial independence. To make ends meet, he toiled away at a Portsmouth shoe factory. Every weekend, Andy would return home, and in true dad fashion, he would bring presents. Bringing home a horse was one of the most thoughtful presents a young Leonard could have received. It was the means by which he acquired the skill of riding. Everyone was in the dark about the fact that this was merely the start of his cowboy adventure. The Sly family had to come up with their own ways to have fun since they didn't have access to modern entertainment options like radio. Square dance was the main event on Saturday nights. Leonard would host parties where the neighbors could hear him play mandolin, sing, and even shout out dance steps. Traditional country music and dancing were on full display. Leonard also picked up the skill of yodeling about this time. Yodeling sounds far more entertaining than yelling. Dinner is ready, so he and his mom would do that when they were on the farm. Although Leonard began his high school career in McDermott, Ohio, he and his family relocated back to Cincinnati after 2 years so that Andy could secure employment at a shoe factory. In order to help support his family, Leonard dropped out of school and went to work with his dad at the factory. He attempted to continue his education by attending night classes, but it's difficult to focus when you're working long hours and dozing off in class. Leonard finally quit school after he was mocked for dozing asleep. He did all right, albeit it wasn't exactly a tale of success for staying in school. The fashionable town of Lawndale, California, had been Leonard's older sister Mary's new home by 1929. In order to see each other, Leonard and Andy left their industrial jobs, gathered their old 1923 Dodge, and headed west. They went back to Ohio after 4 months in California since their fantasy had not completely stuck. But the Golden State made another call shortly after. Leonard was given the opportunity to go back with Mary's father-in-law this time. With no hesitation on his part, the Sly family came along in the early 1930s. Leonard and his dad both found employment driving gravel trucks for a highway construction project after settling near Mary in Lawndale. It appeared like things were looking up in California, but the corporation suddenly went bankrupt in 1931. Great Depression, hardships incarnate, unemployed and without money. Always determined. In Tulare, California, Leonard secured employment as a peach picker for Del Monte. It wasn't exciting, but at least it was productive. They managed to make his labor camp seem like something out of the Bible, but he had to put up with it. Roy was on the verge of glory in California, where something much bigger was waiting for him. Is there something you're interested in learning about that changed Roy's life? Continue to observe. His life was about to be flipped upside down by his sister Mary's suggestion when Len, then 19 years old, returned to Lawndale. She suggested him try out for the Inglewood, California radio show Midnight Frolic on KMCS. Remember that Len was shy by nature? It was Mary's gentle prodding that finally got him to take the plunge. Who needs name brands when you have a sister with Mary's talent? So a few nights later he was rocking a Western shirt that she had sewn for him. With his guitar in hand, Len arrived. He played the guitar, sang, and even yodeled occasionally. Also, you won't believe this, he perfected it. The Rocky Mountaineers, a country music group, asked him to join them a few days later. Good job for someone who is timid, isn't he? Quickly after formally joining the Rocky Mountaineers in August 1931, Len set out to expand the group's reach. Because yodeling was all the rage at the time, he placed an ad in the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner seeking a tenor with yodeling skills. Next up was Bob Nolan, a Canadian who responded to the advertisement. Although Nolan's time with the group was brief, he maintained contact with Len and hit it off. Tim Spencer eventually took Nolan's position, and the band continued. Forming a trio in the spring of 1932, Len, Spencer, and another man called Slumber Nichols decided to give it a shot. So it was a failure. Even when things don't pan out, they keep going. Throughout the year, Len and Spencer tried their luck with a variety of bands, including the International Cowboys and the Obaro Cowboys and the Obar Others. Upon Spencer's decision to take a vacation from the music industry, Len secured a new employment with Jack LaFever and his Texas Outlaws, a popular act on local Los Angeles radio. The three original members of the Pioneers trio, Len, Bob Nolan, and Tim Spencer, regrouped in 1933 to give trio music another go. On this occasion, they were serious. Spencer sang lead while Nolan played string bass and Len played guitar. Their rehearsals were intense, refining their harmonies until they were as snug as a new pair of Western boots. Len managed the group's music while also keeping up with his other radio jobs as Nolan and Spencer began penning original songs. In 1934, they recruited fiddler Hugh Farr, whose deep bass voice added a new dimension to their harmonies, and everything began to fall into place. A radio announcer felt they required a new name after adding Farr to the mix because of how polished their sound became. Since Pioneers Trio didn't think they belonged to a group of kids, he changed their name to the Sons of the Pioneers. Their moniker stuck, and they went from being a trio to a full-fledged band in an instant. These men had become more than simply local favorites by the summer of 1934. They became overnight stars once their radio portions began to be syndicated nationwide. As a result, Decca Records signed them to a recording contract, and they began recording music on August 8, 1934, which included Tumbling Tumbleweeds by Bob Nolan. They recorded 32 tracks, including the timeless hit Cool Water, throughout the subsequent 2 years. As a trio, the Sons of the Pioneers went from relative obscurity to national fame. Not only was Roy a famous musician, but he also had a successful acting career. The fact that he was a commercial merchandiser, thus the museum needs no further discussion. He then went on to become a genuine Western film legend after bringing his acting chops from the stage to the silver screen. Len's foray into filmmaking began in 1935, and he was immediately successful. While still using the name Leonard Sly, he landed a substantial supporting role as a singing cowboy in a Gene Autry picture and landed a string of jobs in westerns. By 1938, Autry had gotten himself into a bit of a financial jam. Seeking a substantial sum of money that the studio was unwilling to give, to find a new singing cowboy without breaking the bank, they set out on a journey. Willie Phelps of the Phelps Brothers was among the many Western singers that waited in line to get hired. Also, you won't believe this, in the end, Len came out on top in this musical battle. Republic Pictures gave him the stage name Roy Rogers, which is a combination of his memorable last name Will and his appealing first name Roy. Soon after receiving this dazzling new title, Roy landed the lead part in Under Western Stars, catapulting him to matinee idol stardom. In the blink of an eye, he had become the country's favorite singing cowboy, rivaling even Autry. However, he became famous for more than only his flicks. As one would expect from an actor whose stage name was Leonard Sly, he also created a name for himself in supporting roles, such as in the 1940 John Wayne classic Dark Command, co-starring future sidekick George Gabby Hayes. Roy's charisma was felt for 16 years in a row, beginning in 1939 and ending in 1954. In their annual ranking of the highest-grossing Western actors, he consistently ranked in the top 10. Between 1943 and 1954, he consistently placed first. From 1938 to 1955, he was also the most popular actor at the box office. For the years 1943 to 1952, he was narrowly defeated in the last 3 years by Randolph Scott. All the Cowboy Oscars would have gone to Roy. The kids loved him. For today's youth, he is synonymous with his flicks. He distinguished himself from his Western colleagues, who remained mired in black and white, by shooting the majority of their post-war films in genuine color. His loyal horse Trigger would go on hilarious animal adventures with him in a few of his films. Do you think a horse with a backstory would be believable? Except in Roy's universe. In the corporate world, Roy was far from naive. By deft negotiation, he secured the right to exploit his likeness, voice, and name for marketing in a 1940 contract with Republic Pictures. Yes, this cowboy was a real moneymaker. Action figures, cowboy books, toy sets, and even a comic strip were all part of the Roy Rogers merchandising line that he developed. Roy Rogers Comics, written by Gaylord Du Bois, was one of his successful comic book series. If we're talking about branded stuff, we can confidently claim he was second only to Walt Disney. Leave it to Mickey. At the same time, Roy's former band, the Sons of the Pioneers, was doing just fine. As members retired or went away, they continued performing, but Roy stayed in touch. Their support was constant in his film, radio, and television projects, even when they weren't acting together. Such a bond that will last a lifetime. He met Dale Evans on set in 1944 thanks to Destiny. They joined the Hollywood Christian group, started by their friend Louis Evans Jr. in 1949, and were vocal about their Christian religion. Notable figures such as Jane Russell and Billy Graham were part of this group. Bel Air Church was their new name by 1956. They were honored for their work with homeless and disadvantaged children in Apple Valley, California, where they settled down with streets and municipal buildings named after them. On top of all that, Roy was a dedicated Freemason and Shriner who generously supported numerous charitable causes. At the end of their TV show, Roy and Dale sang a duet of Dale's catchy theme tune, Happy Trails. Roy Rogers and Dale Evans was a show that they co-hosted in the fall of 1962 on a BC's comic western variety show. Regrettably, it was axed after only 3 months due to its inability to rival CBS's Jackie Gleason show. Roy refused to be discouraged by that. Notable among his many guest appearances on other hit TV shows was his role as the Bushwhackers, a cowboy portrayed by him or someone similar on Wonder Woman. In addition to producing his own series, Roy oversaw production for other projects through his Hollywood production firm, including the CBS Western Brave Eagle, which ran from 1955 to 1956. An innovative spin on the traditional cowboy role was played by Keith Larson in this series as a youthful Cheyenne chief. The Marriott Corporation renamed its Hot Shops restaurants Roy Rogers Restaurants in 1968, after Roy licensed his name to them. He may not have had a hand in operating them, but his name was certainly in every mention. Together with Dale, he made a victorious return to Lubbock in 1970 to headline the Intercollegiate Rodeo at Texas Tech University. Macintosh and TJ, his final feature film, was shot at the 6666 Ranch in 1975, not far from his original location. Given Roy's success, why did he decide to close the museum? Like letting go of a beloved childhood toy, the Roy Rogers Museum will soon be closing its doors. The one you spent an inordinate amount of time attempting to repair using duct tape. Sigh. After a successful debut in California, this museum finally found a permanent home in Branson, Missouri, paying homage to the King of the Cowboys. There, among other things, was a treasure mine of memorabilia from Roy Rogers' legendary career, and it had been a destination for dedicated followers of the singer since 1957. All the way from the taxidermy creatures that Rogers had worked with in the past to the ostentatious plastic saddles and meticulously crafted leather cowboy boots are up for discussion. The story is deeply moving because it centers on the special relationship he had with his horse, Trigger. Rogers couldn't handle the notion of burying Trigger, so he concealed the news from his family for a year after he died. On the contrary, he had Trigger stuffed and put on exhibit at the museum. Roy Rogers' followers were moved by an unusual and very personal collection. How many of us would sacrifice so much for a cherished animal? Then why was the museum's closure announced? What Roy told his son holds the key. The museum would be sold off if its finances grew too much to handle. There was a noticeable drop in attendance after his passing in 1998, according to his relatives. Number of visitors dropped from thousands to only a handful. It was devastating for everyone concerned, but they chose to close shop in 2009 due to declining business and increasing operational expenses. The world-renowned Christie's auction house was the site of a piecemeal sale of the museum's possessions after its closure. It wasn't Rogers' son Dusty's decision, but he had ideas about where everything should go. He was just concerned about Trigger's fate. Even though it broke their hearts to see their treasures go, the family knew it would provide happiness to collectors and fans. Bids exceeded original projections, and more than 338 objects from Roy Rogers' collection were sold at auction in 2010. For example, instead of the assessed $2,000, his first guitar cost $8,750. The rather high price tag even included Rogers' autographed baseball card. Lucky for Trigger and Bullet, Patrick Gotch, owner of RFD TV station, swooped down to rescue them. Thanks to a clumsy phone call, Gotch almost missed out on winning Trigger. The din drowned out his bid, so he cried out, "Hit him, hit him," in an attempt to up the price. Even now, fans are writing to express their gratitude for his heroic rescue of the Golden Palomino. Emotions ran high at the auction's conclusion. As Trigger's stunt double and Dale's horse were sold to a private collector, the crowd broke into a last rendition of Happy Trails. Elks, an auctioneer with 20 years of expertise at Christie's, said the sale was the most sentimental, emotive, and colorful she had ever seen. Those who were lucky enough to have grown up with Roy Rogers still hold the actor, his show, and its storied past in high regard. As those children become adults and start families of their own, the legacy of the golden-tuned Cowboy King lives on. With his wife Dale Evans and several family members by his side, Roy Rogers went away on July 6, 1998, at their Apple Valley, California home. He had to endure many heart procedures in his 86th year. Even though he has departed this earth, his memory as the Cowboys' king will endure forever in our hearts. Admired for his consistent charisma, exceptional musical abilities, and jaw-dropping performances. Then President Bill Clinton observed a memorial service in his honor because of the profound influence he had. Clinton expressed her admiration for his ideals, films, and the impact they had during a visit at the White House Rose Garden. He went on to say that his career would leave a lot of Americans feeling both grateful and sad today, particularly those of my generation. Roy truly believed in honesty, kindness, and decency, and he lived as close to that as a man could, according to Pat Brady, who was Roy's longtime companion. Legendary singer Gene Autry spoke highly of Roy, praising him as a titan of Hollywood who stood tall in faith, family, and character. Famous people paid tribute to him after his death, with Reverend Billy Graham stating, "He will stand as the example of the best things to come out of Hollywood." In considering his father's impact, Dusty, his son, reminisced, "I used to wonder when I was a youngster what in the world was so exciting about this guy. Then I combed through the fan letters, press releases, and thousands of photos documenting his career. It's almost unbelievable. I thought." Roy Rogers was survived by his wife and 6 children. He had 15 great-grandchildren and 33 grandchildren when he passed away. Roy Rogers Jr.'s offspring Marion Swift, Cheryl Barnett, Dodie Saylors, Linda Lou Johnson, and Tom Fox continued his work. The museum honoring Roy Rogers Sr. even appointed his son, Roy Rogers Jr., curator. An obituary published in the New York Times referenced the museum and Roy's frequent trips to connect with tourists. The museum was home to different exhibitions, including those from the Smithsonian and the Children's Museum. The king of the Cowboys certainly never hung up his spurs. He persisted in donning his white Stetson, gabardine outfits, and silver and leather belts, despite the pain in his legs. The Roy Rogers Museum may go down, but Dale and Roy's legacy will live on in the hearts of those who come after them.